Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, July 24th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Earlier this month, the Catholic Diocese of Fresno declared bankruptcy as past claims of sexual abuse came to light in recent years.
They claim the diocese should have known better. Some accuse the diocese of concealing this abuse, and most claim emotional distress, financial distress.
What's included in the claims and what the bankruptcy process can look like. That's coming up in just a few minutes, but first, these headlines. Environmental groups received leaked draft bill language from Governor Gavin Newsom's office detailing an easier path to drilling new oil wells. Cap Radio's Manola Sequeira has more.
The language allows for the approval of new well drilling permits without an otherwise mandatory environmental review. Instead, it says approval can happen if a list of other requirements are met, like requiring companies to plug and abandon 2 wells before the new one is drilled. Dan Ress is a senior attorney for the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. They say the language is likely meant to address the closure of 2 refineries next year, which many worry will lead to a spike in gas prices. But Ress says this is irresponsible.
That seems like a bad choice, knowing both the local environmental and public health problems that oil and gas development causes that we really need to look at as we deploy it, and also the climate harms.
A statement from Newsom's office said the governor will continue working with legislators to stabilize the state's petroleum market. It also noted the language is still in draft form. In Sacramento, I'm Manola Sequeira.
California's Planned Parenthood, the largest provider of abortions in the state, lost its federal funding this week under a court order that allows that money to be withheld while a larger legal dispute plays out. CalMatters' Kristen Wong explains.
Earlier in July, Planned Parenthood Federation of America sued the Trump administration over a provision in Trump's Big Beautiful Bill. That provision would cut federal funding for large, nonprofit health clinics that provide abortions. Now, a federal judge has ruled that Planned Parenthood's arguments show a, quote, substantial likelihood of success. But the judge says only certain Planned Parenthood centers can receive funding while the lawsuit is ongoing. None of California's Planned Parenthood clinics are among those centers. The funding loss for California clinics amounts to roughly $300 million, according to Jody Hicks, head of Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California. While the organization is the state's largest abortion provider, the group says abortions make up less than 10% of the services California clinics give each year. The bulk of patient visits are for sexually transmitted infections, birth control, and cancer screenings.
That was Kristen Wong with CalMatters. Rising costs of pork and bacon were the subject of a congressional hearing on Wednesday, and House Republicans are blaming a California law related to animal welfare. Proposition 12, passed in 2018, increased the minimum cage size for pigs. But a Valley Democrat challenged that argument. Fresno Congressman Jim Costa cited an economic analysis that says the market impacts just aren't clear.
There is no indication that Prop 12 has contributed to elevated pork prices at the national level. I want to insert that for the record.
Instead, Costa blames rising prices on President Trump's tariff wars with U.S. trading partners. Fresno Unified is aiming to improve its school bus system through a new partnership. The district has signed a 5-year contract with the company Zoom that will start this year. Zoom will allow parents to receive real-time data about their child's bus location and their drop-off status through an application on their phones. Special education bus routes will follow suit in 2026. The partnership will also provide new buses, advanced equipment, and higher driver pay.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. earlier this month, the Catholic Diocese of Fresno became the 5th Northern California diocese to file for bankruptcy. The bankruptcy petition follows over 100 claims of sexual abuse, which are anticipated to cost the church financially. The sex abuse lawsuits surfaced after a recent state law allowed the statute of limitations to be lifted for abuse allegations that, in some cases, reach back decades. Claims were made against individuals in a number of institutions, including schools. Our reporter, Kerry Klein, wanted to learn more about what bankruptcy means for the diocese and what's next for the accusers of sexual assault. She's been sifting through the lawsuits and sat down with us for a conversation. And a note, part of this interview includes broad descriptions of sexual abuse. Kerry starts us off by discussing what this bankruptcy means for the Catholic Diocese of Fresno.
On July 1st, that's when the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fresno filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. There are different kinds of bankruptcies, of course. For instance, those familiar with tech company Bitwise, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That's when assets are sold off and liquidated to pay off massive debt. But in Chapter 11, a company or nonprofit, and the diocese is a nonprofit, basically reorganizes. There are creditors who say they're owed money, and the organization has to propose a plan to pay off those creditors over time. This means churches and parishes should be able to keep operating while the bankruptcy process plays out, and that's undoubtedly important for parishioners. You know, a Catholic nonprofit estimates the Fresno Diocese is among the 30 largest dioceses in the country by population. It covers portions of 9 counties, not just the San Joaquin Valley, but also into the Eastern Sierra and Death Valley, and it's estimated to serve around 500,000 Catholics.
Okay, so when the diocese filed for bankruptcy, it had to submit some documents with a lot of different information, and you actually were able to view those documents. So did you learn anything interesting from them?
Yeah, when an entity files for bankruptcy, it has to file a petition, a bankruptcy petition. And so the petition from the diocese certainly illuminates some of its finances. First off, the diocese claims it has $50 to $100 million worth of assets. It also claims $50 to $100 million in liabilities. And it also claims it has 1,000 to 5,000 creditors. And of course, creditors include anyone who's owed money by the organization. And that includes accusers who filed sexual assault lawsuits, which I think we'll get to later in this interview. But at first blush, these dollar amounts all felt really high to me, $50 to $100 million in assets for a religious entity. But I asked a bankruptcy lawyer if any of this seems out of the ordinary. Riley Walter is an attorney in Fresno. He represented Madera Community Hospital in its bankruptcy proceedings, though he doesn't represent anyone in this current case. He says, no, these financial disclosures seem pretty reasonable given the size and scope of the diocese.
The diocese is a landlord, so someone has to be managing property. The diocese is going to have insurance. The diocese is going to have employees and employee plans and pension plans, and it's going to be buying gasoline. You know, it's a business.
So before we get into specifics, Kerry, I know there's been a lot of cases that have been filed in recent years because of a recent change in law, right? Cases against the church, specifically abuse claims. So tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so these were largely filed thanks to a state law called Assembly Bill 218. It basically extended the statute of limitations for cases involving alleged childhood sexual abuse. Before that, victims had until their 26th birthday to file lawsuits. But then thanks to this law, survivors could file lawsuits from any time in their past, but they could only file within a 3-year window from 2020 through 2022. And hundreds of cases poured in that time. I've been told 1,800 cases were filed just among dioceses in Northern California. And largely these all occurred very long in the past. They're likely, most of them are not recent and could have occurred decades, even a half a century ago.
Wow. So specifically for the Fresno Catholic Diocese, tell us a little more about some of the cases that you reviewed.
So the diocese has said there have been 153 claims or lawsuits in total. I have not been able to look through all of those yet, not even close, but I've looked through a handful of them. And the allegations, as one might expect, are kind of horrific. Though it's important to remember that they are just allegations for now. They've not been heard in court. No one has been deemed guilty or innocent. but they involve allegations of sometimes really shocking abuse. So one case, for instance, involved a Kern County boy in the early 90s. He claims he was forced to perform sexual acts with a priest. He was 6 years old at the time. Another case goes back to the 1970s, when an 11-year-old girl allegedly was groped and then assaulted multiple times by a clergyman in Fresno. And other cases reveal very little about what happened, when, or where. Some name the clergy, some don't. There's really a lot of variety in what's in these lawsuits. But common themes among all the cases I've read are that the accusers claim they were isolated from their peers and groomed. They were people that they trusted. They claim the diocese should have known better. Some accuse the diocese of concealing this abuse. And most claim emotional distress, financial distress. One accuser attempted suicide. And all of these are, unfortunately, relatively common claims that we hear from similar abuse cases involving religious institutions all over the country.
Has the diocese responded or given a comment about these lawsuits and the bankruptcy?
I'll start with the bankruptcy. The diocese sent out a press release the day it filed its petition. Bishop Joseph Brennan was quoted as saying the church must address the suffering of victims of abuse and that he commits to confronting allegations of abuse with diligence and care. But the diocese has said they will not offer any more comment on the bankruptcy for the time being. And the diocese has also made a handful of statements about these claims in the past. For instance, a year ago, Brendan put out a video with a similar tone, not necessarily admitting to any specific abuses within the diocese, but still committing to a tone for the suffering inflicted on victims. And the diocese has even published a list of clergy on its website that it considers to have been credibly accused. It's a list of more than 60 priests. Many have died in the time since the alleged abuses occurred.
Wow. So on the other hand of things, how have the accusers and their advocates responded to this bankruptcy filing?
Many advocates representing sexual abuse survivors are unhappy. For instance, the Survivors Network of those abused by priests fears bankruptcy proceedings means payouts for survivors will be much lower than if they had all gone to court. I also spoke with Rick Simmons. He's an attorney representing a handful of accusers in Northern California, and a lot of his concerns boil down to the timing of the filing. First off, when an organization with lawsuits against it files for bankruptcy, any outside court proceedings are immediately stopped. And so the diocese signaled last summer that it would be declaring bankruptcy imminently. And so Simmons and other law firms, they stopped their proceedings on these abuse lawsuits as a courtesy, even though the diocese had not filed for bankruptcy. But then the bankruptcy filing came 10 months after that, not immediately. And so Simmons says those assault cases could have actually made a lot of progress in court if they had gone forward in the meantime.
During that time, these people could have brought their cases to trial. They had trial dates scheduled in 2024 and 2025 in Fresno. They could have had their public hearing, their day in court. They could have been able to have responsibility imposed by a jury, and they, lost those rights.
Do we know what next steps look like for the Fresno Catholic Diocese and its actual bankruptcy proceedings?
Well, Walter told me that the next few months will be a lot of procedural stuff. So filing of documents, getting representation settled, allowing banking arrangements, etc. And once that's all settled, the diocese's lawyers will then have to make a big reorganization plan. For instance, it'll say, here are all our assets available to pay out claims. Then they'll assign a person or entity to be the claims manager. That entity will then begin the process of evaluating lawsuits alleging sexual abuse, determining which are valid, and determining how much money should then be paid out to those accusers, if any.
And what actually happens next with all those lawsuits?
Well, for now, they've been all folded into these bankruptcy proceedings. And so technically, they get evaluated as part of the bankruptcy process. But down the line, lawyers or claims managers can petition to get them bounced back to their original courts or to other courts entirely to be adjudicated there. It all feels very convoluted to me, and I'm sure there will be lots of twists and turns to come later. And so as for how long this could take, no one has a crystal ball, of course, but Walter estimates the whole process could take around 2 to 3 years to settle all of these claims in total.
KVPR Associate Editor Kerry Klein, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And that does it for today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Kerry Klein, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.